today's clinicians are just not completely satisfied with just being a clinician. Is it the technology? Is it the way we work? Is it something else? I cannot point my finger at it, but I think that for people who want to constantly grow and who want to constantly move forward, I can see how only working as a clinician can be somewhat limiting.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we've got episode 5 of the Clinician Founder Podcast, where we explore how clinicians are building expert-led, mission-driven ventures that are reshaping healthcare from the inside out. I'm your host, Dr. Shubhendu Kulshreshtha, an executive coach and an emergency physician, helping clinicians become founders through clarity and action. Today's episode is all about the intersection of surgery, innovation, and technology. I'm joined by Dr. Stefan Arsenkov, an abdominal surgeon, educator, PhD researcher, and co-founder of 3D Loom, a medtech company pioneering the use of 3D printing, augmented reality, and virtual reality to transform surgical planning and medical education. Stefan is one of the few surgeons globally to successfully integrate 3D printing anatomical models into soft tissue surgical planning. And his journey today is going to be covering and showing us what can happen when clinical insight meets cutting edge technology. We're going to explore how he built 3D Loom, the challenges of innovating in a highly technical and regulated space, and what you should know if you're thinking about breaking into medtech, 3D printing, or AR and VR. Oh, and if you haven't already, follow this Clinician Founder Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the following episodes. All right, let's get into it. Thanks so much for joining us today, Stefan. How are you?
Thank you, Dr. Shub. It was wonderful to have the opportunity to join you, and thank you for your invitation. I'm feeling great and really happy to be here. As you yourself said, our short chat before we began the recording session was really interesting, and I'm looking forward to the entirety of this experience.
Yeah, likewise. And I think you're my first guest from North Macedonia. That's fantastic. Thanks for joining us all the way.
Thank you, and I'm happy and proud to be your first guest from North Macedonia.
Amazing. So let's dive into the conversation, shall we? Tell us a little bit about the overview of your career journey, the big picture. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, it depends on where you want me to start, but I've always been interested in the technical side of things, not just 3D printing, but maybe IT in general. And actually, it was a big dilemma of mine whether when I was choosing if I should go into medicine or something more IT related. And when I chose medicine, I thought that was it. I thought that was the end of my IT or my technology journey, because we're not forced, but we're taught to think in that way, that once you start medicine, there's just no other way for you to go. And even though I chose medicine, because there are a lot of different specialties and subspecialties and a lot of different lifestyles in medicine to choose from, because the lifestyle of a surgeon is completely different of lifestyle of a radiologist, or maybe, I don't know, emergency medicine doctor, or even there are more greater differences. I chose medicine not knowing where I wanted to start or where I wanted to end up. So I'm not completely sure how I chose surgery. I just went into the OR one day and I realized that's what I want to do. But even then, I never thought that one day I would be doing all of this, because it was, as I said, a mind made up that medicine is the final destination. Treating patients is what I will do for the rest of my life. And maybe 3-ish years ago, even though I did have during the COVID, I did have some maybe not side hustles, but side projects that I was working on. I was exploring different areas. I did go into programming a bit. I did the research for my own, to satisfy my own thirst for something different. It was never something I thought I'd be doing on a daily basis. And I took a trip to Singapore, where I saw that there was an in-house 3D printing department in the hospital that we visited. And that's something that stayed with me for weeks after that journey. And I work in a fairly small hospital, and we have maybe 50-ish doctors of all surgical specialties with about slightly more than 100 beds here. So there's a high turnover rate, but it's a fairly,
Hmm.
both physically and structurally wise, it's a fairly small hospital. And what stayed with me was how can I use that I saw in a hospital with more than 1,000 beds and I don't know how many employees. How can I use what I saw there? How can I use it and apply it here? And first, I thought it would be a good idea to just get a 3D printer and just try printing stuff. And I was just informally talking to a colleague of mine who said, I know a guy who works with 3D printing. And I said, okay, I don't know who he is and what's his like, but let me meet him for a coffee and maybe he'll tell me something that would be of interest to me. That's how I met Ogden Plavlevsky, who is the co-founder of 3D Loom.
Okay.
And we hit it off straight away. Once we started talking, I don't think we've still stopped to talk constantly.
Are they a clinician as well?
No, he's a tech guy. He has a degree in AI, but he has worked with 3D printing for many years, maybe close to 10 years before.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to meet what he once said because we started actually, we didn't know what we were going to do. We started just to explore the opportunities that we could seize and to see what we could do. Basically, that was it. Let's see what we can do with this.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, before we get more into what 3D Loom itself does, this is a really interesting phase because I feel like myself and a lot of the people I work with as well, we go through this phase of constantly trying to search for something. You know, there's often side hustles or little projects, and there's like little responsibilities and roles we kind of take up with the intention to try and do something. You know, what's your perspective on that? How did you see that phase? And clearly, the 3D Loom fits into.
It is very similar because I think that today's clinicians, maybe not all of them, but there are a lot of clinicians who are just not completely satisfied with just being a clinician because maybe I'm not sure. I haven't worked in medicine 50 or 30 years ago. I do not know how that was like. But is it the technology? Is it the way we work? Is it something else? I cannot point my finger at it. But I think that for people who want to constantly grow and who want to constantly move forward, I can see how only working as a clinician can be somewhat limiting, especially when you work. I know you're connected with the NHS. It's a fair. I mean, it's one of the best, if not the best, systems in the world. But it's still a social system. It's still a system where you have to follow guidelines and regulations, etc., which is, let's say, similar to the system we have here. And when you work in such a system, your confines are pretty strong in what you can do and how you can move forward. And I think that's something that for people who I'd like to think that are very good clinicians, it always leaves something to be desired.
Mm,
And that search that you mentioned is either a way, as you told me before, either way how to improve the quality of service, the quality to improve the well-being of your colleagues around you. You can always see some bits here and there that could be improved and that can benefit from some action, but not always are you empowered to do something about it. And I believe that's why there is a whole movement of clinicians with very good and strong ideas trying to move out of those confines of working in a clinical setting.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think the word that often comes up in these conversations is impact. Like we're really looking to scale our impact and the difference we make in this world. And just as I'm kind of hopping onto your web page, the first thing that 3D Loom says is surgery made safer, reducing complications by 32% and saving $3,720 operation. Now, that is really well quantified impact. Can you talk to us a bit more about how that happens and why that's important to you?
Of course, yeah. As I said, I will just circle back to where we were, and we'll get back.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a nice way to continue. As I said, we were searching for what we can do, and I was really not aware of what is the potential and what is actually the impact of using 3D printing. And we thought of a few different things. And what I first wanted to see is how I can better get a better understanding of the anatomy of a patient with a very complicated anatomical variation. That's how everything started. And once I tried it, I saw that my understanding got a lot better. Not just because didn't need to imagine stacking the CT images anymore. I just had the object in front of me, because as I say, every imaging modality gives us a 2D representation of a 3D structure, no matter what it is. Even if we look at a render on a screen, it's still a 2D representation on a flat screen that tells us something about a 3D object. And I was astonished at how different my perspective is when I see a CT scan, when I see a render, when I see a volume rendering, and when I get the object in my hands. And that was the first time something clicked. And the next time, this is a story I tell everybody. The first time that we used actually a model preoperatively was a colleague of mine, an orthosurgeon, and it was a complex tibial plateau fracture. And to cut a long story short, when he finished the surgery, he was like, he didn't believe he exited the OR, and he searched for me, said, I do not believe how good it was to know where everything is. I've never felt this way in a surgery before, and I finished at least an hour early than what I expected.
Wow.
And to be honest, I didn't quite believe him. I thought he was just trying to make me feel better, because it was the first time we tried everything. Next week, I did that for my patient. I did it for a patient who had a distal pancreatic tumor. We had to do a distal pancreatectomy and splenectomy. And I worked with a colleague of mine. When I opened it, I felt like I was watching a movie for the second time. You know,
Wow.
How do you feel when you watch a movie you've seen already? You know what's going to happen. You cannot be surprised. You expect all the little things that you didn't when you first watched it. And I finished the surgery in about, let's say, 90-ish minutes. And when my chief of department came in the OR to see how I was doing on the start of the surgery, came about an hour-ish later, and he was, how are you doing? And I said, okay, it's fine, we're finished, I'm closing up. He said, oh, you finished so early, so you couldn't take out the tumor, right? It was inoperable. No, the tumor is outside over there, and I finished the surgery, and I'm closing out the wound, the patient is doing it. But how did you do it that fast? What did you do? Which corners did you cut? I said, none. I was just completely aware of everything that I encountered. And I was so efficient that I myself couldn't believe what difference did it make. And that's how everything started. That's how we focused on what you said. How can we make it safer? Because when you know what's there, you know where not to go. You know exactly where to go. You know what it is you're encountering. There's no doubt. There's no second guessing. There's no let me try and see the CT to remember if this vessel is this or that, which in a complicated surgery is something that happens fairly often. It was just like throwing a pebble down a steep mountain, and it all went way faster than I ever thought it would.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I'm literally thinking that we want to translate information that's within a patient to a version that's easily understood by a surgeon, because essentially a good surgeon translates an image in their mind into something with their hands and then converts it from their imagination to actual real 3D orientation. And currently we go via scans, which can only give us two axes, or even at best, if there's a 3D rendering, it's still an image in your mind, but it doesn't actually come into your hands. And suddenly you're translating that. So why go from a patient to 2D to imagination to your hands when you can literally go from patient to 3D in your hands to operating in your hands for the second time? That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the benefit of that is there is a benefit on every level, because when I talk to a patient using their model, using their anatomy, they do not need to know anything beforehand. Because if I try to explain a CT scan to a patient, they might know, they might understand, but they might see a CT scan for the first time that might have no clue what it is, what they're seeing. But if I show them an object, like I have these behind me, if I show them, this is your stomach, this is your pancreas, we need to cut here and take this out, they have much better understanding. They have a lot more trust in the procedure. We have a better communication. They trust the process more, which I believe and I'm sure of it leads to better results and leads to better
Mm.
outcomes. Because if I have a patient that does not trust me and I have a patient that does not believe in what I am supposed to do, I would rather not do the operation than have a patient that doubts me or the process, because I know that there will be complications with it. I cannot put it in numbers, but I'm sure that the greatest predictor of complications is the trust and the communication between the doctor and the patient.
That's beautiful. Just kind of going back to that time in Singapore when you first saw a 3D printer within a hospital setting, did you have any idea that it could be capable of bringing such impact to surgical care? Or did you come across this eventually as a result of trial and error?
I knew it was something there. I knew it was something I wanted to try. I just couldn't imagine it in such a precise way. It was like opening a gift. You can probably see how big is it and what shape is does it have, but you're not certain what's inside. I
Hmm.
felt that way. I just felt a strong urge to work towards it, not because I knew that it would lead to this, but I was expecting something very valuable.
Wow. Okay. Could you take us through a couple of steps? So you met your co-founder, you started to explore 3D printing. How did you get from there to really the idea of the business of 3D Loom?
Well, it was actually we did a few more models after that because I was excited to show all my colleagues what's going on, and one of them asked, what if I want to use this in another hospital, or what if I get a case there? How do I how do I pay you for your effort? If because this is something very valuable, it's valuable for me. I know you're doing it on based on your enthusiasm right now, but how do I keep getting what I need?
Hmm.
And that's the first time when we stopped and thought about what are we doing besides having a lot of fun and doing a lot of good things. How do we put this into some concrete terms and into something that's palpable, pun intended. And we sat down and we thought that we believe in what we do. We can clearly see the benefits and the results. So we believe that this is something worth pursuing, and we just agree that this will be our focus and we'll try our best to do whatever it is. So actually what we did is we incorporated or we created 3D Loom in a way just to be able to provide this service for my colleagues here, and
Hmm.
it grew ever since because now we're at the point where we're trying to get funding and to reach a certain development stage where we can provide this for the entirety of the European continent. Because
Wow.
if you see the statistics, I think 2019 there was less than 10 hospitals that had in-house 3D printing departments, and in 2024 I might get some numbers wrong, but the point is that there were more than 100. So that's a tenfold increase in only a few years, and still that's a tiny bit of percentage of all the hospitals in the U.S. And of course, those are the most the hospitals that have the biggest budgets. There's the richest hospitals that can afford an in-house 3D printing department. But what I think is needed is that everybody. There's no reason why a smaller hospital, smaller budget, couldn't
Hmm.
afford a 3D model for their complicated case, and why should that clinician, surgeon, or patient be devout of that facility just because
Yeah.
the hospital does not have the budget to build an in-house 3D printing department? They can just the idea is that they would be able to contact us. We would provide the model, or we would uh, somehow deliver either via a local print shop or just by sending the full model over there, and they would reap the benefits without having to do all of the hard work that we need to go through. Because
Hmm.
there are no clear guidelines on how do you position an artery, or how do you position a liver to be best printed with the fastest settings with the best results. It's something we needed to do step by step. Why not use it to allow everybody in the closer or wider proximity to use the benefits of having a identical replica of patient's organs so that they could be the best prepared they can be for every complicated surgery.
Yeah, that's very cool. So your origins were in the interest in IT and tech, and then 3D printing, and your enthusiasm behind it, and then you started to get a vision of actually the impact that this could make and how it could scale, and then the impact scaling, and of course an ecosystem that kind of feeds itself and continues to progress. Even I like to think about things like this requiring lesser and lesser effort the more they get going, almost like a flywheel that keeps rolling down a hill as you've already started pushing it, and now you're a man on a mission, and you've got a mission of actually scaling this and getting it out there and getting the world to know about it. This is where the fun begins. This is where kind of the challenges come up and some of the hurdles come up. And as you're alluding to, I think the initial regulations and like standardization and all of those things, what would you say were the biggest challenges to getting 3D Loom to even where it is right now?
What was the biggest challenge?
Mm,
In line of what we're speaking, the biggest challenge I faced was deciding that I will spend my time doing this.
wow.
Because starting out, it was very fun, it was very interesting. It's the curiosity and the desire for research that drives you. But sometimes you reach point very, very quickly. You reach the point when you see that you need to make a decision. What do I do today? Do I spend my time doing this research or doing this presentation or doing this meeting or thinking about how can I do this model? Or do I spend my time with my patients, or how do I do both, and how do I not feel guilty about doing one thing and not the other?
Mm,
So the biggest challenge for me personally was deciding that this is what I want to do, not just because I want to do it, realizing that it's not making me less of a clinician for doing something outside of the clinic.
yeah. How did you make the decision? What was there a particular moment? Was there somebody who said something to you that helped you make that decision or the realization that you got to commit?
It was a combination of things. I think I was talking to a colleague of mine who's a radiologist, something about how I prepare a model, and I don't know. I'm not sure which term did I use, and said, "Wow, that's a term used by radiologists. You're not a radiologist. How do you?" And I said, "Well, I had to learn about a lot of things by doing this." And that was the first time that I realized that actually I'm learning things that I wouldn't have been able and wouldn't need to learn had I decided just to work as a let's say run of the mill surgeon.
Mm,
That was one thing that I said, okay, so I see some benefits here. Another time was when I was talking to another colleague, a surgeon colleague, we were thinking about whether to tackle a difficult case of I think it was cholangiocarcinoma or such. I might be wrong, but that's beside the point. The point is that what he said we were thinking about, and he said, "Well, I think I could do it if you provide a model for me." That was the second time. It was like, okay, so what I'm doing
yeah.
is not only impactful, it actually directly helps patients, because if that was not the case, that patient might not have been operated on. Luckily, the
Mm,
case went wonderfully. The patient is alive and well, but had that not been the case, maybe we wouldn't have let's say, the courage, or I'm sure the confidence to tackle it. So that was the second part. And once I was talking to my father, who's also a surgeon, and who wasn't sure if he approved of what I was doing when I started it, and I'm telling him all of this, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like they wouldn't have the courage to start. They, speaking of his generation of surgeons, wouldn't have the courage to start or to tackle these problems back then because they didn't feel that they had the right to, or something like that. And that was maybe the third time that I was the third validation, or maybe the third instance of being shown that this is the right way that I'm taking. Not to mention that I have to say that my wife is also a physician, and at the end of the day, when we're talking, we realize that whatever we start talking about, we always end up talking about this journey that we are on as a family and as a clinician. So we realize that that's something that's in our heads all the time. We think about it all the time, and if that's not something that tells you that it's worth doing, what else?
Yeah, that's beautiful. It sounds like you've really listened for people's feedback and the value kind of coming to you rather than you defining your own value. People have said, "Can you do this? I will pay you for it." And like, please, you're solving problems for me. I think there's no better sign to know that what you're doing is worth pursuing than that. So, what does your day or your week look like currently, splitting between the two?
Well, to be honest, I was quite envious of you when I read your post the other day that you said that you have 2 days for clinic, 2 days for your company and your mission. You have 1 day for yourself, and that was something I was really envious of because I did not have that kind of luxury. To be honest, I work everything. What was the name of that movie? Everything, everywhere, all at once. What was the name?
Yeah, that's it. Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Yes. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to do everything all at once
Yeah.
because I do not have that luxury of having days divided. Although
Mm.
that's something I would really want to. My week is depending on my OR schedule, is depending on my clinic schedule, and whenever I do not have any clinic or OR, I try to fit in everything that I can. Research, I try to do think about new cases. I try to solve current problems that we have some meetings, and etc. etc. So it does look a bit hectic, but it's something that I enjoy. And if being in a tight schedule is the price to pay for that, I'm happy to do it because
Yeah.
as you very well put it, the impact is obvious, and the impact is something that we work for and we strive for.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I think this is again a challenge that a lot of clinician founders face because we do still want to keep doing our clinical work. Where do you find your time is best spent between you and your co-founder or perhaps the larger team? Which sort of business function is it? Maybe marketing? Is it sales? Is it research? Is it actual delivery of the product? Where is your time best spent?
I could not tell you. Actually, there's three of us. Me and Alvin started at 3 alone. Then we had one person join. He's also named Stefan. He has been my friend for a long time. But we met at a certain conference, so he saw what we were doing, wanted to join the team because he believed in what we were doing. So there's not now actually when 3D Loom started functioning as a proper startup was Stefan joining in. Ever since, I've been doing things that I never thought I would be doing in my life as a doctor, as a clinician. I started going to meetings, I started working with business plans, and I started talking about startups and accelerators and investors, and that was not something that has never crossed my mind whatsoever before when I was studying that I would be doing that.
Mm,
So, in that context, I feel most comfortable when I'm doing research and development, when I'm thinking about how to solve a current problem that we're having. That's when I feel the most fulfilled, besides being in the OR. So those are
okay.
my 2 points of professional, how do I say it, peaks. It's either I'm doing our R&D on some product that we're doing or some model that we're having some trouble with, or I'm doing a surgery. That's where I
Mm,
feel most at ease, and I feel my time is best spent professionally. And it's always a pleasure to be able to solve a problem and to help a colleague and by proxy the patient that they're treating by something that we've worked on. And
mm.
it's wonderful to be able to do it and to be able to be in a position where you can offer something unique, tailored for that patient, for that instance, and still have it work so well as it does. So it's really wonderful.
Yeah. That's amazing. Let's get a bit nerdy if that's okay. Let's talk about like what material do you actually use and the things behind you. Are they some of your products?
Yeah, those are my models. I have a couple of these showcases here. It's not a showcase, just a place where I need to keep it because we're at my office slash workplace workshop here. We usually most of the time we use FDM because of it's easier to work with. So we use PLA, TPU. We use there's some PVA, some PET. There's all kinds of materials that we try using, but we
Hmm.
also work with resin printing. All kinds and types of resins are even much more varied than the FDM materials. I mean, we are constantly in the search for new and better materials and better ways to provide what we do. So actually, as I said, Ogden is the guy with concerned with the with the technical aspect, with the 3D printing itself. I'm
Mm-hmm.
generating the models, and we're talking about the design and the execution.
Mm.
But actually, he's the mind behind all the printing stuff. So we do try to research new and better materials. Try doing some, I don't know, the last thing we tried is to see how good does wood PLA correlate to bone density. We try to see how does it feel to drill into a wood PLA some model compared to bone. And that's
Mm.
just a snippet of what we're doing lately. So we
Yeah.
try to see which material fits the best with the use for it.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we're looking into a lot of resins because there's some very interesting developments in the world of resin printing and the new materials, both in their optical and their physical characteristics. So that's something that we're also working with. Basically, anything we can get our hands on, we try to apply it.
Yeah. And if someone's thinking about starting up their own 3D printer and kind of emulating what you've done here, what are some of the regulatory hurdles or other guidelines that they need to take into account?
Sorry, you said regulation.
Yeah. Is there anything that gets in your way?
a What gets in our way is that regulation in medicine is fairly slow, and I believe that uh, we are the last kind of industry to adapt to the new wave of AI and 3D printing and all the new technologies that come up. I believe that it's been long overdue, and like we spoke before we started the chat, 3D printing
Mm.
has been around for a long time, and it's something that actually we couldn't or we weren't able to use to its fullest potential, and I blame the regulations for that. Because having so strict regulations is wonderful for safety, is wonderful for patient benefit, and to be able to be sure that we're not doing any harm. But I'm
Mm.
sure that in a way it hinders progress. So we're not free to explore all the possibilities because we have to comply with so many regulations. And actually, for the 3D models themselves, it's the least regulations there is because the model itself is just a tool, something that facilitates something that's already done and something that's already regulated. So
Yeah.
that's the easiest part to go into. So if somebody tried to do that, it would probably be the easiest to get into is trying to do organ and anatomical models because everything else is a hassle, and it's not just a hassle. Being such a new technology, 3D printing is it's not regulated everywhere. Sometimes
Mm.
some countries do have some sort of regulations. Some countries do not have any at all, and it's a bit difficult to see where do you fit. Is this a medical device? Is this classified as a medical device, or is this classified as something else? Does it affect the judgment and the decision making process, or does it not? Does it facilitate? Is it something different than a CT scan? Or is it the same thing, just in a different modality? That's all some questions that we needed to answer, and the answers are not universal. Sometimes it's one,
Mm.
sometimes it's the other, and trying to work in a medical maybe field, I would say it's something that I didn't know and something that I had maybe not trouble, but had needed time to accept that things would move a lot slower than I want them to because of all the regulatory red tape that we have to jump through because that's how things are. We cannot
Yeah.
do. I would never jeopardize the safety of my patient, but the rules are there to be followed, and the rules are there for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? I mean, you've got clear benefits and outcome measures, and then there's all of these things to be wary of and look out for, and patient safety is at the top of it. But I suppose if you're looking at some setups, they might also even talk about like how much time are people taking to plan beforehand, and is that worth the benefit that the patient eventually gets, and things like that. So I think you've done a really fantastic job with quantifying the impact that you create. How any top tips for doing that?
That was actually the hardest thing to do. It was most difficult to quantify the impact. We had to
Mm.
look into all the different bits that come into us, the health system as a whole, because I believe that preventing complications and doing preventing preventing side effects is something that's not easily quantified. That's why I have the anti-vax movement, because they will somebody who does not need who's against vaccines will say, I did not get sick, I did not need the vaccine. Well, yeah, or the seatbelt analogy. I haven't had a car accident ever before, so I do not need to wear my seatbelt. I mean, everybody can see the flaw in that logic, right? But how do you
Yeah.
quantify how many times has my seatbelt saved me because I've always worn it?
Mm.
It's difficult to do, and we had to approach it from all the different angles as a health system in whole. But I believe that saving any, preventing even one incident of damaging a blood vessel that would need to be is justified if in the case of using a 3D model. We have our in our case studies, there's cases where up to 40%, the time was shortened up to 40% when using a 3D model. And there are clear statistics that show that every 15 minutes, every increment of 15 minutes of duration of the operation increases the chance of SSIs for another 13%. So if we can shave off 15 minutes of one operation, we've decreased the chance for SSI by a significant number.
Wow.
And how much does it cost to treat an SSI, right? How much antibiotics, how much gauzes, how much work,
Yeah.
how much human resources does it take to treat an SSI?
And quality of life and the person off work and
That,
all of those things in the greater economy as well. Yeah.
yeah, that's what you said is absolutely right, and you can maybe make a note that I did not mention the quality of life, because I think that the quality of life is the biggest impact that we can do.
Hmm.
Sadly, it's not that easily to quantify, but
Hmm.
for a patient to be able to feel better after the surgery because they weren't exposed to the atmospheric influences for a longer time, or as you said, did not have an SSI, is something that's worth it in every case, at least in my opinion. Because I'm a clinician, I do not deal myself with insurance or with coverages or etc. etc. We have the ability to work in a system where everybody is insured, and we everything that's at our disposal we can use for every patient. So I would never want to work in a system where I should withhold treatment for a patient just because some regulatory or insurance obstacle. And for me, it's absolutely worth doing and taking the extra steps to prepare a model for complex surgeries. Of course, we do not do model for routine gallbladder removals, but dealing with complicated cases that are at their start prone to complications and they're difficult even before we began. I think it's our duty to do everything in our power to
Hmm.
make the journey better and safer for the patient. And
Yeah.
that quantifying it was the most difficult thing that we had to do. And even so, I cannot, even having all those numbers, I I feel that they do not bring the full message to the table. The only way I think I can show it is to give a model for to a fellow surgeon before the operation and hear their impression after the surgery.
Yeah. There's just some things in the world which you can't actually realize the value of until you experience it. And it
Yeah,
seems like this is one of them. But I think you've done an absolutely fantastic job covering various different metrics, both on the patient side as well as the surgeon side, as well as the hospital side. So you've really understood the stakeholders and people involved in this journey. And I'm sure that's led to a huge bit of success for yourself as well. Would you be happy to kind of speak to us about the business model and I guess the pricing structure with something like 3D Loom? I'm assuming, to me it sounds like a B2B, business to business sort of a model. Is that right?
well, yeah, that's actually the most difficult part, as I said, quantifying and developing the business model, because ideally, what we strive to do, what we aim to be, is a company where we would be contacted by a surgeon or a hospital, in a way that we could provide the model for them.
Hmm.
It will be either on a case by case basis, where the pricing depends on a lot of things. If I mean, it's obvious to think that a model of a broken radius would be very different than a model of the full liver with intraparenchymal circulation and all the
Hmm.
different relations. So that's one thing, either on a case by case basis or maybe on a subscription base where they know that they usually need 10 models per month. So we provide 10 models per month for agreed. Or it would be a subscription on a larger base. Or the last part is that we could aid hospitals in building and developing their own in-house 3D printing departments, not just by providing expertise and providing the printers and materials for them, but we could also be seen as a sort of an outsourcing for generating models, and then we could take on the role of generating the models and sending models back to the hospital where they would be printed. So there are a few
Hmm.
different modalities that we could work in, and that's something that we're all willing to explore depending on the needs of the client.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is you've really broken down the process as to say, okay, there's materials, but then there's also the digital rendering, then there's the actual printing, and then the assembly, and then the use, and you can have different variations along that scale as to what your business model is like. And it sounds like, and even from your website, it looks like there's all sorts of that's possible. And I guess if people are listening to this, and I'm thinking my wife is an orthopedic surgeon, she loves kind of practicing beforehand and mental visualization and all of those things. If somebody like that wants to reach out to you and they've got a really tricky case coming up and they want Stefan to just give them a model to practice on before surgery, what's the best place to find you and how do they do that?
Well, they can reach out via our webpage, or they can just shoot me an email or message on LinkedIn, and we will be happy to work all the details out. And I would encourage all my colleagues to try it at least once. The best thing about doing all of this is that actually there are no side effects. There are no downsides to using a model to prepare for surgery. Keeping in mind that the model is properly produced. The
Mm,
model is true to the original. Because if we use an old CT scan that does not show the current state, that's a possible obstacle or a hindrance, or if the model is not prepared as it should be. If some very important structure is omitted, or if it's not rendered properly, then it's dangerous. I would say it's dangerous. But if we know the model is well prepared, if the model is good, there's actually no downside. It can just be an addition, and it can just improve the understanding, not just for that exact case, but for all future cases similar to that. It will be a helpful uh, tool to have. So I would encourage everyone and who's listening, all the surgeons, all the clinicians, to either try and get to us and we'll provide the model, or try by themselves to get the model and see how much of a difference does it make.
yeah, that's fantastic. This is so exciting for me because I'm a bit of a nerd on YouTube and I kind of spend a lot of time on the nerdy side of YouTube. And I saw the whole 3D printing revolution take off. And very early days, I was part of, I just kept seeing a lot of these videos where people were printing 3D printed prostheses and they were functional without having to use batteries or electronics. And they were especially useful in children when, like, every 3 or 6 months they'd grow out of it. Everyone had kind of come together, made an open source design, and people were just lending their own material in 3D printers to print for their local community. And I thought this was fantastic. And I took it to our local prosthesis lab in India, and that project kind of grew from there. And it's just so exciting to see that. I guess in a way a little disappointing that we aren't using it to that extent across the globe, but also exciting to see the kind of work that you're doing and clear impact that you're making on the back of it. So thank you so much for sharing such a inspiring story and your journey and being so forthcoming with everything about 3D Loom. I'm sure our listeners have been super inspired. At this point, what I usually do is I hand over the mic, we flip the script, and I let you ask me one or two questions or on whatever you'd like to ask me.
Oh, that's great, because I was looking forward to this. I would just have one thing that will lead to my question, as
Yeah.
what we were talking about using 3D printing in a medical setting. And as I told you, when we started working with Ogden on using the 3D printers for what we do today, is he said that something along the lines that he said he was working with 3D printing for close to 10 years. And he said that this is the first time that he felt like he was using 3D printing for something that mattered.
Wow.
Because up until then, he was doing functional, but not that impactful 3D prints. And he told me that this is the first time I know why I am doing this. I know
Mm.
why I keep awake at night trying to finish the print because tomorrow's surgery depends on my model. It's how it draws people in because it's so impactful.
Mm.
Keeping that in mind, we talked about, and I'd like to hear more about because your experience with 3D printing is not something to be neglected. It's a valuable experience. What do you think is the reason? Why isn't 3D printing what we do as models and what we thought about the prosthesis and what because that's something we've done here also created a 3D printed hand prosthesis for a child. Why isn't that the standard of care? Why is it that besides the regulatory, why aren't people more and clinicians using it more and facilitating it more?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I have to obviously say that I haven't actually printed anything myself or held a 3D printed model of my own ever, but I have been a bit obsessed about it. And I guess from the perspective of trying to take an idea into healthcare and implementing it is something that I've constantly got a bit of experience with. So I think like most other things in healthcare, anything new, anything different often leads to the whole process of change, right? Leading change, managing change, implementing change. And for me, change always kind of comes down to people. You might say it's always about the culture, it's always about how we've done it before. But for me, in my eyes, it's always about people. And people in general are very hesitant to change. And as clinicians, we're very, very risk averse. So even if something like 3D printing comes with, oh, you're using a CT scan. What if you could hold the CT scan? Just seems very simple and very obvious. However, if the moment you propose that to most people as clinicians, we immediately are trained to be looking for what could go wrong. And we start off by looking at, oh, what could go wrong, and this could go wrong, and that could go wrong. And we've got a huge barrier and a hesitation to change. So I think there's a huge element of that is part of why things like 3D printing don't take off the way they do in other industries, despite the obvious ROI, right? I think the other element to this, from my perspective, is that as healthcare, we are high performers. As surgeons and physicians, we are high performers and we're striving to constantly do our best. However, the expected or required standards on the other side aren't always of perfection. I think it's built to accommodate for mediocrity in a way. In sort of a nice way, it's built to accommodate to say this is good enough and the average outcomes for this are good enough. And I think that's largely because it's not like if we repair a structure, that's not all that happens. Like the repair or the fixing of a bone is not all that happens as it would in a race car, for example. You fix it and that's all that it remains for the rest of its life. The strength and the ability of performance in that race car depends on the nuts and bolts you put in eventually. But no, it's a human body, it heals. So even if you're not perfect in your outcome, the body compensates and the body heals. So you only kind of have to get it across the line by about 60 or 70%, and then the human body does the rest, right? So, or like you remove the problem, as a lot of surgeons do as well, is remove the problem and then the body takes care of the rest of the healing. So I think that also plays into the lack of need for perfection. Now, that being said, I think the space where 3D printing is extremely useful is also the place where like 3D rendering of CTs kind of comes in, like really complex surgeries, brain surgery, removal of separating twins, and like complex anatomy, those kind of situations. And I think to a large extent, vascular surgeons probably use it as well. Yeah, those are kind of the thoughts that are coming up for me.
Yeah, I have just to add to you, but I would really like to circle back. We have time about what you said about the mediocrity.
Mm.
One thing that I'm uh, about the use of 3D printing, I would like to share one thing that I'm fairly proud of is what we did. We had a patient with a cranial defect because they had an infection in their bone, and their bone was eaten away by an infection, and it was a very not just functional but very psychological problem for them. What we did is we made a sort of a cast to pour PMMA, a polymetal metal acrylate, inside, to pour it and to press it and have it come out just just in the shape that it needs to be, so that it's perfectly symmetrical, because we made it using the patient's CT scan. We rotated it, we saw the defect, we filled it. We made it everything just so the patient can have a symmetrical, not just functional, but also psychological. And the outcome has been so great. We did that with a neurosurgeon friend of mine, colleague of mine, who called me to ask me to do it. He's based in another city, so we traveled there. We did it. We had about 10 iterations of what we did, but finally, when we did it, when we applied it, and when we finished, it was astonishing to see not just the I would dare to say perfect results, but how something so complex can be made so simple and can be made so available by the use of 3D printing and the modern technology. That's something that would have been unimaginable to do maybe even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So now, circling back to what you said, it's something that I haven't taught myself, but I feel it resonates strongly with me about accommodating mediocrity. Even so, be it in a good way, as you said yourself said. But do you think that's something that maybe prevents clinicians from moving, from asking for more, just like you yourself did when you started your journey as a coach, as something outside of the clinic? Do you think that had you, I'm sure that if you were satisfied with mediocrity, you wouldn't have gone. But do you think that our colleagues, our clinicians, are sometimes they do have great ideas. There's a lot of great ideas outside, but what lacks is the motivation and the courage to act upon them. Do you think that we're taught as clinicians that sometimes good enough is good enough, but actually it's not. We must strive for the best we can be. Do you agree that that's part of the problem why more clinicians aren't branching out outside of medicine?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think my take on it is the thought isn't really well formed, but at the moment the thought is that what success is for everybody is quite different. And there's few of us who are obsessed with mastery over the skill and the craft. There's some of us who are obsessed about the flow and the system. And there's some of us who, just see it as a job. We just kind of show up, do what's expected, and success means, spending time elsewhere. So I think the measure of success and what good looks like is very different for everybody. And the truth is that everything we choose to do or not do is always a trade-off. What are we giving up to gain this? And I think there is a subsection, even within amazing surgeons, there's a subsection of what you could consider as elite surgeons, I guess, who really go to the extent of restoring functionality to an exceptional degree. And for those kind of people, these additional tools and the amount of time, the trade-off is always valuable because what matters to them is different from what matters to perhaps another surgeon. So it's an interesting thing, and I'm curious to see how it kind of keeps forming. I know Yatin Shada, I think, wrote a post on LinkedIn as well. He has his own podcast, and he was kind of talking about like what are the drivers, what are the motivations of our colleagues, of clinicians and clinician founders as well, I guess, is another thing to think about. So yeah, I think it's what success is and what good is different for everybody. And for those that are looking for more and have that itch, I think we end up taking the route, going down the journey of becoming a founder. We've got a vision of something different, something better, and there comes a point where we want to really bring it to life, and that's what this podcast is about.
Yeah, and I have one more question if we have time for that.
Yeah, we've got time. I think our audience have time if you've got time.
Oh yeah, of course. Do you think that you had to trade off some of your clinician skills to do what you do? Or do you think that you have gained a lot more by doing what you do? And in turn, do you see yourself, I'm going to be blunt, do you see yourself as being a better or worse clinician because you do what you do?
Yeah, I love this question. And we kind of talked about this in the chat when we first were conversing as well. I think for me, it's definitely made me a better clinician. And I think I was talking to this with Hesham on one of the previous podcast episodes as well, is the sense of in the emergency department, when you work, you're constantly running at 100%. and then it takes 2 days afterwards to recover. And initially, you would recover to about 100% again, but then slowly, as time goes on, your recovery time gets longer and longer, and the ability to recover is worse and worse. So, you finish shift at you start at 100%, you finish shift at 30%. 2 days later, you've only regenerated back up to 70%. So the next day, you start shift, you're at 70%, and you go down 10%. And the truth is, that's really not fair on your patients. They're there on the worst days of their life. They're there because they need you desperately, and you're there trying to do your best, but you haven't actually allowed yourself the circumstances and the environment to do your best. So for me, scaling down on the clinical time has helped me recover, and then having something else to do has fed me in a really different way that's led to satiety and fulfillment in my career, so that I feel super confident and good in myself in the work that I'm doing as a coach, and the consulting that we do. And then also when I go into the clinical world, I feel really confident in what I'm able to deliver, because I've spent time recovering. I've spent time being able to reflect and study and become a better clinician. So for me, the answer is a clear yes. It's made me a better clinician, and I am 50%. And of course, that means that I don't do my clinical skills as often, but through simulation practice, regular visualization, and practice, I think that's possible to keep up with. Yeah. How do you feel about that? I feel like it's slightly different for surgeons, where you really need to master your craft. But is there perhaps a time when you've done enough cases, you've hit your 10,000 hours or 50,000 hours, and you feel like, okay, now there's only marginal gains to be had?
Well, yeah, I believe that why I'm important to this mission, this action that we're doing, is because I am a practicing surgeon. Had I not been
Hmm.
one, I might not have been able to see not just the need, but the potential solutions to many of the problems that we're facing. So my value in this is the fact that I'm practicing currently, and I would never want to completely forego that practice. But I'm confident that I have been able to do things that I would not have been able to do it had I not started what we do with 3D Loom. So I'm sure that I had patients who were helped because I do what I do. I know I've learned a lot more stuff than I would have learned because what I do, because there's a saturation of knowledge that you reach, and there's only the return value of the time spent, and what you've learned is very low at a certain point in life. I'm not
Hmm.
absolutely not saying that I know everything and I cannot learn, but I'm saying that I learned so much more by doing other stuff than I would have been able to outside. So I know that I've learned a lot more, not just from my area of expertise, not only for my specialty. I've worked a lot with orthopedic surgeons that I would not been able to. I worked a lot with neurosurgeons. I have scrubbed in on all kinds of different surgeries because I do what I do, and
Hmm.
I've learned so much that has helped me in my daily practice. So all I can see is benefits, all around benefits from what I did, and
Yeah.
I've learned a lot more stuff. And that has helped me not to fall down in the trap of mediocrity, as you said, because I wanted to talk to you about something else even before we started.
Hmm.
I'm going to brush up on it now. I have to be honest, I haven't had a colleague of mine who I know that hasn't had a certain burnout at one point or several points in their career.
Yeah.
So for me, this is not just a mission and a vision, it's also an outlet for that type of work. But the point was that it also helps me deal with all my other responsibilities by having this outlet. Because I know that during my residency, I know that during my med school years, and even after, all of my colleagues have had one or more burnouts in their lives. And I believe that because they were oversaturated with clinic and with medicine as a practice and
Yeah.
with the confines that we talked about at the very beginning. So
Yeah.
if they would have been able to pursue their own passion like you are doing right now, I'm sure that even the not just the quality of service would have been greater, but the quality of life of the clinicians would have been greater. Maybe not
Hmm.
everybody has a passion to build a startup or host a podcast or coach other colleagues, but whatever it is, I think that clinicians must be able to have their outlet in one way
Yeah.
or another.
Absolutely. I often look at it as like a T shape. So there's the depth, but then you've also got to have the width. You can't just be a single eye with no width in the kind of things that you do and what you expose yourself to. I think that's super important to kind of grow as a human being and to be there for your patients, for your colleagues, and for your family as well. I think that's a huge bit of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
I'm glad you
That's a
brought that.
wonderful answer for my question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stefan. I just got a comment here from Dr. Bhargav who says he feels that one of the barriers is the need perception, and it is important to understand from a learner's perspective where this would be needed most in their learning curve. I think he's commenting on the barriers to adoption of 3D printing, and I think that's really interesting to look at it from like a learner-learnee
What
perspective
was
as
the
well.
term? A need perception, right?
Yeah, need perception, and to understand it from a learner's perspective, where would the need be the most in their learning curve? So I
Yeah,
think that's a really interesting one.
that's it. That's something interesting. When I started 10ish years ago, CT scan was reserved for the most complex of cases. We didn't do CT scan for appendicitis, let's say. Now we don't go into the OR without a CT scan if we doubt appendicitis. So that has
Hmm.
been a shift that I've been a witness to, and I hope that I'll be witness to this shift that we not go into the OR without a 3D model because it makes all the difference. And I'm confident, and I would like to see it as a global shift towards us doing more and better for our patients.
Yeah. Amazing. That is fantastic. This has been such a good conversation. I could honestly keep going for the rest of the day, but perhaps we both need to get back to more of our work, both clinical as well as non clinical work. So I'm going to say that's it for today's episode. Huge thanks to Dr. Stefan Arsenkov for joining us inside the world of 3D printing, AR, and VR in surgery, and for showing how clinicians can be at the forefront of building groundbreaking technology. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Our next live episode is on Tuesday, the 19th of August at 11:30 a.m. British Standard Time. We're going to be having Dr. Anurag Gangupati, or Anu as he likes to be called, joining us from Australia. Anu is the founder of Stat Doctor and will be diving into his journey of building a healthcare business that's changing the game in urgent care access. It's going to be packed with lessons for clinician founders who want to create solutions that scale. So mark your calendar and join us live on the 19th of August. Until then, keep building, stay bold, and remember, you have the power to create something extraordinary. See you the next one.
Thank you, Shub.